Every painting had a painter, every building had a builder, every watch had a watchmaker, and every human had a human maker. God. The argument is flawed for many reasons.
In the beginning of the 19th century, Paley published his work called Natural Theology. In it, he argued that biological organisms are the result of intelligent design. He is known for using a watch as an illustration to make his case. Atheist Stephen Woodford, known by his popular channel Rationality Rules, made a video debunking the watchmaker analogy from Paley. It might surprise you, but I agree with many of the arguments Stephen makes. There's just one problem. Paley's argument is completely different from what Stephen thinks it is, so his whole video is not a response to Paley, but simply a straw man argument. Welcome to the channel, my name is Karel de Lange, and the goal of this channel is to help you see that the Christian God exists. The aim of this video is to show that Stephen Woodford fails miserably in debunking the watchmaker analogy. He completely misrepresents Paley and therefore commits the straw man fallacy. Let's listen.
The primary flaw of the watchmaker argument is that it commits a false analogy fallacy. It does this because it erroneously asserts that because two things share one quality in common, in this case complexity, they must therefore share another quality in common, in this case a creator.
The first straw man has to do with the word complex. Stephen seems to think that Paley argues that complexity is a good criterion for design. This is not at all what Paley is saying. In the beginning of his argument, Paley compares a stone to a watch. He then explains that we intuitively perceive that the stone might always have been there, but that the watch is designed. Let's read what he says. When we come to inspect the watch, we perceive, what we could not discover in the stone, that its several parts are framed and put together for a purpose, that they are so formed and adjusted as to produce motion, and that motion so regulated as to point out the hour of the day, that if the different parts had been differently shaped from what they are, of a different size from what they are, or placed after any other manner or in any other order than that in which they are placed, either no motion at all would have been carried on in the machine, or none which would have answered the use that is now served by it. Paley makes it very clear that he isn't simply talking about complexity, but also about functionality. Later on he says this: arrangement, disposition of parts, subserviency of means to an end, relation of instruments to a use imply the presence of intelligence and mind. This is something complex, but it's not just complex. Intelligent design theorists have a name for this: functional coherence. In the book Undeniable, molecular biologist Douglas X explains what this means. Functional coherence is the hierarchical arrangement of parts needed for anything to produce a high-level function, each part contributing in a coordinated way to the whole. In other words, if the different components with different functions all serve the same overarching purpose, then there's functional coherence. You can compare it with a piece of writing. The letters are in the right order to form meaningful words. The words are in the right order to have a meaningful sentence. And the sentences are in the right order to have a coherent paragraph, and so on. We all immediately recognize that this can only be done by an intelligent agent. This is what we see in a watch, but also in living organisms.
A second fallacy that the watchmaker analogy commits is a false cause. It does this because it asserts an exclusive cause and effect relationship between complexity and agency, when not only has such an exclusive relationship not been proven to exist, it has been proven not to exist. A raindrop is remarkably complex, but that doesn't mean that it was created by an intelligent creator. To the contrary, in fact, we know with certainty that raindrops are the product of natural, unconscious processes.
Raindrops are indeed complex and not the result of design, but so is a stone. Paley would agree because he even compares stones with watches. Both are complex, but watches are more than that. They are complex and functional. A good example is information. The sentence, "this sentence has functional coherence," is just as complex as the sentence, I cannot pronounce it, because it has just as many characters. But we all recognize that the first sentence is intelligently designed, while we cannot justify a design inference for the second sentence. This is because there is no functional coherence in the second sentence. The order of the letters and numbers is random, so they don't serve some overarching purpose, while the letters in the first sentence do. This is what Paley is getting at. He uses a watch as a clear illustration of something that has functional coherence, and because of that fact, we are justified to make a design inference. The second strawman fallacy Stephen commits is that he suggests that Paley is simply giving an argument from analogy. Watches are complex, humans are complex, watches have a creator, therefore humans have a creator. Even if we represent Paley more accurately and replace the word complex with functionally complex, then Stephen still misses the point. The argument is not that because watches are functionally complex and designed, that living things must also be designed because they have functional complexity in common with watches. Of course, this is a silly argument, and it is easy to see why. Watches are made in a factory and have functional coherence. Therefore, since humans have functional coherence, they must be made in a factory. This doesn't make sense. So Stephen is right that the argument as he formulated it is flawed, but Paley's actual argument is very different. He explains the reasons why our intuition about the design of watches is justified. He goes into all the intricate details of watches. He says the following. We see a cylindrical box containing a coiled elastic spring, which by its endeavor to relax itself turns round the boss. We next observe a flexible chain communicating the action of the spring from the box to the fusee. And he goes on and on. The chance that all these different parts, which are all in service of the same purpose, can come together so neatly is astronomically low. So since the watch is clearly functionally complex, the best explanation for its origin is an intelligent designer who intended to make this. After this, Paley makes a general case that the best explanation for anything that is functionally coherent is that it is designed. Since living things such as humans are functionally coherent, it follows that they too must be intelligently designed. This seems to be an inference to the best explanation. We can summarize Paley's argument as follows. Premise 1. The best explanation for something with functional coherence is that it is intelligently designed. Premise 2. Living things have functional coherence. Conclusion. The best explanation for living things is that they are intelligently designed. Paley explains why we are justified to believe that a watch is designed. It is because of functional coherence. So Paley does not say that since watches and humans have something in common, that humans must have a maker because watches have makers. No, Paley explains that the way we can know that something is designed is by determining whether it has functional coherence. So this is in essence not an argument from analogy. The focus is not on watches, but on functional coherence. The watch is just an illustration to show why functional coherence makes sense as a good criterion for design. He could have used many other good examples. So it is not that since watches are functionally coherent and designed, and humans are functionally coherent, that therefore humans are designed. From experience we know that all things that have functional coherence, such as books, watches, cars, computers, etc., are all the result of design. We have never seen functional coherence arise as a result of some natural process. Since living things clearly have functional coherence, Paley argued that intelligent design is the best explanation for their origin. So if Stephen wants to debunk Paley, then he needs to show that either premise 1 and or 2 is false. Now you might raise the following question, but what about evolution? Stephen actually mentioned it in his video.
As said before, there are many more ruinous objections of the watchmaker analogy. Charles Darwin, as briefly touched upon, crucified the argument when he presented evolution by natural selection, which demonstrates exactly how natural, unconscious processes can, and indeed have, produced complexity most beautiful and most wonderful.
Stephen boldly asserts that Darwin crucified the argument. This is simply an unjustified assertion. Since the rise of genetics, there's a considerable amount of data to put Darwin's theory to the test. Darwinism combined with this data is called Neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism is the view that natural selection and random mutation operating on variations in living things can explain the biological complexity we see today. It might surprise you, but there's no evidence that this mechanism is capable of producing all the information that is stored in DNA. To be clear, I'm not saying that there's no evidence for evolution. Evolution is a very ambiguous term. It can mean the following three things: the process of change and diversification of living things over time, the theory of universal common descent, and the mechanism behind evolutionary change. So natural selection and random mutation operating on random variation in living things, that these things can explain all the biological complexity. There's no evidence in support of this third definition of evolution. In fact, more and more evidence is piling up that reveals that it is impossible that natural causes or processes can account for the origin of all the functional coherence we find in biological organisms. If you want to know more about why this is the case, you can watch my video about intelligent design. Link is in the description below.
The third and final fallacy that I'd like to bring attention to is one that isn't technically committed by the watchmaker analogy itself, but is almost always committed by its proponents, and that is special pleading. If, as proponents assert, complexity requires a creator, then by applying their own logic to their own conclusion, we must insist that since their creator is complex, it too must have had a creator. And since the creator of the creator must be complex, it too must have had a creator, and so on and so forth forever. It's turtles all the way down.
What's interesting about this point is that this is actually a good argument for the existence of God, rather than against it. Let me explain. Both theists and atheists need to avoid an infinite regress of causes, so if they want to explain why anything at all exists, they need an ultimate explanation. You need to stop somewhere. Everything that exists has an explanation for its existence. Things either exist necessarily or contingently. Numbers, for example, exist necessarily. It's impossible for them to not exist. They are not caused by something else. Things that exist contingently are caused to exist by something else. So when we talk about an ultimate explanation for everything that exists, we are talking about something that exists necessarily. Without such an explanation, we end up with an infinite regress. So there must be something that exists necessarily. If God does not exist, then some mechanistic or natural cause must be the ultimate explanation. While if God exists, then He is the ultimate explanation. Many atheists hold the view of philosophical naturalism, or ontological naturalism, which basically means that nature is all there is. A philosophical naturalist holds that there is nothing more to the mental, biological and social realms than the arrangements of physical entities. So in other words, the ultimate explanation of everything that exists must be some physical cause or process. Intelligent design theorists argue that natural processes cannot account for the origin of biological organisms because they have functional coherence. In a nutshell, their argument is that intelligence always precedes functional coherence. Since living things have functional coherence, intelligent design theories conclude that biological organisms must have an intelligent cause. Stephen is right then that this cause, if it exists contingently, needs an intelligent cause as well, because it also has functional coherence. If, for example, extraterrestrial intelligent agents were responsible for the origin of living things on Earth, then these functionally complex agents must have an intelligent cause as well, because they themselves have functional coherence, and so on. We must stop somewhere, and if philosophical naturalism is true, then biological organisms must ultimately have been the result of some natural cause, because nature is fundamentally all there is. This means that some kind of mechanism, such as the neo-Darwinian one, must ultimately be responsible for all the biological complexity we see today. The problem is that Stephen's point is only valid if philosophical naturalism is true, and if all possible intelligent causes exist contingently. There's no reason to assume this. If God exists, then by definition He exists necessarily. This is not special pleading, because if God is the creator of the universe, which consists of space, time and matter, He must exist outside of it. So God can be seen as the timeless, spaceless and immaterial creator of the universe. Such a supernatural intelligent cause solves the infinite regress, because it is immaterial, spaceless and timeless. Only things that begin to exist need a cause. A timeless intelligent being has no beginning, so it does not need a cause for its existence. Furthermore, as we have seen, both theists and atheists need an explanation that exists necessarily. So according to the theist, God is the ultimate cause of everything. He exists by the necessity of His own nature. So thank you, Stephen, for pointing out that if Paley's design argument is reasonable, then it follows that we are the result of an intelligent cause that exists necessarily, because an infinite regress of contingent intelligent causes is absurd. In other words, thank you, Stephen. Your special pleading case shows that Paley's design argument is not simply an argument for the existence of some unknown intelligent creator, but for the existence of God.